I think the internet is revolutionizing the way people obtain and process information, and as a result, changing the fundamental ways that we interact with government. And as a result, I think altering to the very core the way we think about politics, the way we elect officials, the way we interact with government overall. Until just a handful of years ago, I mean, we thought we knew what the internet, how people were going to use it. We thought we had some sense of it. Facebook hits, Twitter hits. Not enough can be said about how much that has altered the way people gather information. There's political science theory out there that suggests that participation particularly in the United States, has dissipated tremendously over the last 50 years or so, just gradually declining and declining. And one of the theories asserted out there as to why is that social capital is on decline. And social capital can be, in the simplest terms, can be thought of sort of an interconnectedness between people. And then if people generate social capital, they are compelled to participate in the process. One of the ways that social capital is built is through social networking. And in a pre-internet world, people thought of this as joining groups, as being, being part of civic groups, being part of bowling leagues, things of this nature. And since social media, what my co-author and I argue in the book is that social media is reconnecting people. Now, we're not going to assert that it can replace face-to-face interaction, because it doesn't. That said, it offers something that we didn't have prior to. And so people are beginning to exchange information, and most people have a Facebook page, and they know, they'll have some friends who are posting up political news, some friends who aren't. Nonetheless, you can begin to feel a part of a community. And Facebook has even taken this a step further into where they're using algorithms to predict which friends you interact with the most. And so those are the friends that are going to show up on your homepage. So if you're having friends who, birds of a feather flock together, people who tend to have friends with similar political views might be those who are more likely to start showing up on their Facebook page. And so then the news stories that they post, what ends up happening is a lot of people get information that reinforces their own predispositions, because they're getting things that are supportive from their friends. And what we found in the book is we use survey data and measure how much and in what ways people are using social media, and then test to see if it actually does increase political participation, which was, if social networking via the internet is stimulating social capital, then we would expect there to be a relationship between social media use and political participation. And we find that that's the case. Even when holding constant sort of traditional predictors of participation. So if we control for people's socioeconomic status, age, when in socioeconomic status, income, education, these kind of things, and the traditional predictors of whether somebody's going to participate or not, even holding those things constant, heightened social media use predicts an increase in voting and political participation in a whole range of different ways. When we think about political participation, most people tend to think of it simply as voting. You know, if you vote, that's political participation. And yeah, that's true. But we conceptualize, sort of following scholars that came before us on this front. Political participation is much broader. Or signing petitions, going to rallies, writing letters to your congressmen or state legislators, contributing money to a campaign, a whole range of different things of that nature that we call participation. So what we end up doing is we actually create a measure that incorporates all of those kinds of things, and then look at how online social media use relates to those, and find that online social media use predicts that type of broad participation. Where I think the biggest ramifications are, it's around the way people process information cognitively. Most of the things in the sort of the formal ways that government uses internet, to campaign, or whether it be for open source kind of information, that kind of thing, that's all getting worked out. What we don't know a lot about yet is the way that it changes how people perceive their world. And I think that any attitude that we have about our surrounding world is really nothing more. It's just a product of the information that we have cognitively accessible. I see some object, whether it be political or a tree or anything, and then I draw upon whatever information I have to evaluate what I think about it. And when it comes to politics, most of that information is coming from media, conversations with friends, these kinds of things. That's where that information's coming from, and we are constantly updating this information. Now, that's just sort of a theory about how people evaluate the world around them and how we process and why we would think one thing over another. So you could go in somebody's mind. If you can measure, that you have this type of information, then you can predict a range of things that they're going to think. Okay, if all of this information is coming from sort of the outside world for the most part, and we have this new mechanism, the internet, that I think gets coupled with the fact that people do not like to take in information that challenges their own predispositions. It's uncomfortable. Cognitive dissonance goes back to the 50s psychology theory. And we don't like information that challenges our predisposition because it doesn't feel good. This is why, your Fox News, your MSNBC, from two different, why they're hits, because they just feed people information that reinforces their own predispositions. Everybody's happy, everybody's comfortable. Well, the internet facilitates this process because people can self-select even easier than they can by picking Fox News, or because even if you watch Fox News or even if you watch MSNBC, you're going to be forced to get some of the alternative view. The internet, not so much. I mean, it's very easy for people to pick blogs, to pick a range of information that supports their own predispositions, their social networks, from the people. And so I think that the future, what's the future of this, is that the internet as disseminators of information, media and whatnot, becomes more and more savvy to this and use it as, for marketing, that it is going to further polarize people. Because what's going to happen is people's attitudes are going to become more and more crystallized. Because back to my original point, if your attitude is nothing more than sort of a summation of the information that you have accessible, and now the more and more you're constantly updating this information, and the more and more you get is just reinforcing information, then your attitude's going to be crystallized from both the left and the right. And so it creates polarization, and we measure this in the book and find evidence that people do indeed self-select information, and that as a result, their attitudes become more extreme and polarized. Now, after we looked at that, that's one of the implications. Everybody automatically assumes that a polarized country is a bad thing. You know, that's, you know, people think, oh, that's terrible. That means there's conflict, there's all of this. One of the other things we found that was one of the most interesting things in the book, I think, was that the more one-sided information that people gathered, the more likely they were to participate in the process. I know that most Americans believe that it's a good thing for us to participate, at least vote. It's a good thing for us to vote. And you know, we know that people believe that so strongly that if you look at a survey and ask post-election and survey the public on whether or not they voted, after every election, somewhere in the range of 75 to 80% of the public claims to have voted. And we know even in presidential election years that it's only about 50%. So that means somewhere in the range from 20 to 30% of the American public is willing to lie to a complete stranger and say they voted when they didn't. Now that's funny in itself, but what it tells us is that there is an incredible pressure in this country to, you know, that we are socialized into this idea, you've got to vote, get out there and vote. And so people are embarrassed if they didn't. And so they are more comfortable lying to somebody about it than they are saying they didn't do it. So that tells me that Americans tend to think participation is important. And if that's the case, our results suggest that as the country, as people, not as a country, but let's say as at the individual level, as people's attitudes become more and more polarized, they are more likely to participate. And so if the internet is indeed polarizing people, a perhaps positive side, a byproduct of that is increased participation.